Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Anastasia Gutko. I'm a founder of the Borshch of Art, the organization that organizes tonight's event. I am very pleased and happy to see all of you here in this room tonight. Despite of the cold weather, you're here and it means a lot to us, to me personally, and I believe this will be, it is for sure a historical moment for our organization to present the first ever fellowship research. Our organization is young, we are less than a year old, but I feel we already produced a lot of events and make a lot of steps towards the future success and to our ambitious goals. And tonight, I would like to thank Sochynsky Society for hosting this event, having us here in this beautiful renovated space. I would like to say thank you to our board members who've been instrumental in designing the program. We have Ksenia Nouril at panel with us today, Lori Kaval here. There are other board members who contributed as well. And of course, I'm grateful for the first supporters and donors who've been contributing to the program. That's allowed us to offer the fellowship and the stipend to tonight's presenter, our star of the night. And since I started to chat about it, I would like to introduce you to Olenka Tsyhankova. She is our inaugural fellow. You can read her bio at the handout, just to save the time. And Ksenia Nouril, Dr. Ksenia Nouril, she is our supporter, our board member, our advisory board member, and a mentor to Olenka in her journey. And without further ado, I would like to pass the word to them so they can share their journey together for the past few months.
Thank you. Okay, everyone can hear us well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you, Anastasia, Borshch of Art, our board members, advisory board members, and last but not least for me, Olenka. This has been such a journey and a pleasure to take this with you really from start to finish as the inaugural fellow. And I think what we will be doing tonight is taking you sort of along in a Reader's Digest version of that experience from the very first exposure to Borshch of Art in this fellowship for Olenka, how she proceeded to investigate her topic, what methodologies she used, her background, how that came into play to support this work, and of course, giving you a preview. This is the privilege you all have with us tonight, a preview of her paper, which will be shortly published. And then, of course, thinking ahead to the future for Olenka, the future for Borshch of Art, and hopefully for me too. It's been such a pleasure and honor to serve as the mentor for this inaugural fellowship, and I look forward to the many future fellows that Borshch of Art can hopefully support as this research is innovative and very vital now more than ever. I don't know, Olenka, if you want to say a few words.
Yes, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity, for all of you for coming, and thank you, Anastasia and Ksenia and Lori, for everything we've done over the past few months, and for this beautiful space where this presentation is going on right now. So.
And this great crowd. I mean,
yes.
In person, this is a really, really strong crowd for it being like negative 19 Celsius outside or something ridiculous like that. So, well done you, and hello to everyone online. So we're going to jump right into some questions that we've been thinking about over the last few weeks, and then there will be time for audience Q&A at the end. So if you can reserve your questions, please do ask them at the end, and then we'll conclude with a toast upstairs for those in person. So, Olenka, could you tell us a little bit about your background? Where you're from, where you've studied, what you've studied, your academic research, biography precedes you. Those here can read it in the program, but do tell us a little bit more about where you're coming from.
So I'm from Lviv, Ukraine, and I've been here for the past almost 2 years at this point. And I studied in Ukrainian Catholic University. My major was cultural studies and visual art, and I've been there for 3 years. And then when war started, I had to find a different place to study because I was abroad. So I went to Notre Dame. I was selected as one of 10 students from Ukrainian Catholic University. And there I studied religious studies, contemporary American art, and American studies. But then my semester there was over, so I had to figure out where I go next, whether I go back to Ukraine or I find a different program for Ukrainians. And I found Bard College, which is upstate New York. And I went there as a visiting student, and when you're a visiting student, you study simultaneously both in 2 universities, in Ukrainian University and then in American University. So I did that twice, and I was in Bard College, and I was studying museum studies and also something related to cultural studies, whichever courses I could choose and find. And then I went to New York City with my friend and randomly decided that if there is such an opportunity, I would transfer to Bard College and stay there for a year. So that's what I did, and there was a scholarship, so I stayed for another year, and my major was American and Indigenous Studies. And that's what I got my bachelor's in May 2024. So that's my very long background.
But it's a very interesting background, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge the multidisciplinary nature of your research. You mentioned things like American studies, visual studies. I mean, as an international student, coming to those subject matters must mean you have a very interesting, unique perspective. Also, you mentioned Indigenous studies, which for me was, as your mentor, probably the most interesting discovery for me as I worked with you through your research and your methodology, because it has its own methodology, which as a classically trained art historian in the American system, I was not, unfortunately, exposed to. So could you just explain that a little bit and how Indigenous studies specifically relates to Ukrainian art?
Sure. So I decided to study Indigenous studies because it's sort of like a field of decolonial studies. And decolonial studies is a field of knowledge that goes beyond anything Western and Western academia. It critiques Eurocentric system of knowledge and learning, and critiques colonialism as well. So the Indigenous studies, as a part of decolonial studies, they are shifted towards the topics and systems of knowledge that usually have been disregarded, marginalized, or colonized and othered. So at Bard, for example, I was the first class that I took that was in the realm of Indigenous studies, because we didn't really have that at Notre Dame. This class was called Indigenous Methodologies in Art Research. So it was both Indigenous studies and art. And everything that I learned there was completely the opposite from what I was studying in cultural studies, which is mostly just like anthropological type of situation. And Indigenous studies and methodologies that are part of Indigenous studies, the way that you view researcher and the research is completely different, because researcher is more like a listener, and there's no subject of research, but rather a person or the people who share what they can share and what they want to share with the researcher. And so like the authority is completely shifted and flipped, basically.
Yeah, I mean, this power struggle for me, or this power like dynamic and the sort of like, as you call it, the flipping and the struggle between the researcher and the research, the listener or the questioner. That, I mean, for me really resonated. Also, what so many people are doing now within Ukrainian studies and Ukrainian art history is really decolonizing art history vis-a-vis the history of Ukrainian art. And so for me, I thought that was really a sort of prescient decision on the part of Borshch of Art to give you particularly this fellowship, because you brought not just this background in Ukrainian art and Ukrainian history, but also this really rigorous understanding and practice of Indigenous studies and in Indigenous methodologies. So I think that truly, enriched the work you did and made a unique contribution, because I do think, this decolonization and decolonial studies, it's a big buzzword now, and a lot of people are doing a lot of great work. But I think also in the spirit of decolonialization, that work also predates this work in so many other subfields. So it's wonderful that this fellowship has been able to nod to that and really coalesce it together.
I just wanted to add one more point regarding decolonial studies, just for people maybe to better understand how it works. So in Western academia, knowledge is considered something that can be extracted, and the researcher, again, has this authority to go and take whatever they want. But in Indigenous studies or Indigenous studies methodologies of research, the researcher, again, goes as a listener, and the knowledge is something that is gifted, and only the person who's giving the knowledge can control the amount of knowledge that they're giving to the person. And there's so many different protocols within so many different Indigenous peoples regarding this knowledge sharing. And a lot of it is disregarded, unfortunately, but again, in the field of Indigenous studies, they're working really hard to protect these protocols and explain them to researchers that are trying to understand what is Indigenous studies, because it is very ethically specific.
Well, considering a majority of, if not all of the artists who feature in your research are here tonight, I think it's a testament to you practicing these methodologies to their highest level, because the respect that you had for your artists is being returned to you tonight. So I think it's a wonderful testament to the success of this research. Now, that will come into play as we dig deeper and talk a little bit more specifically about your research paper, but I just wanted to talk, make sure people here knew, how did you find this opportunity?
So before I graduated from Bard, I was very worried that I will not do anything intellectually challenging when I moved to the city, because I moved here without a job. I had no idea what I'm doing in the city. So when I moved on September 1st, on September 5th, I went to Walter Art Fair, and I volunteered there in Ukrainian Pavilion, and that's where I met Ola Rondiak, who's one of the artists who I wrote about and interviewed. And I also met Anastasia there, and she was in the picture. And this was a panel discussion about art healing trauma, and I was just talking during Q&A session, but that was my initial idea to write about art and trauma, but then it shifted to craft.
How did you learn about
So I met Anastasia, but before that, when I was still at Bard, two of my Ukrainian professors told me about this fellowship, and then when I met Anastasia and she gave me a little card about Borshch of Art, I was like, okay, I hear you, I'm applying. So I applied, and that's how I learned back at Bard.
So truly a sign from a deity above brought you to Borshch of Art. And I think it's a testament to Borshch of Art and the efforts that Borshch of Art, especially under the guidance of Anastasia, have been making. The presence Borshch of Art has had in the public space at places like Volta, at other art events throughout the city, has been really impressive. And I was part of the panel that reviewed the fellowship applications, and the applications were very competitive. I mean, truly, with the opportunity, we could have granted more than one fellowship. I think Borshch of Art is ambitious and hopes to be able to be in a position to offer more fellowships as time goes on, with the support of generous benefactors. This could, be a very rich and fruitful area of development for Borshch of Art, because truly the application vote was very, very competitive. So, going back into the fellowship, what did you got the fellowship, and what did you think? Like, where did you begin? You talked about being interested in trauma, which tracks, I think, with the work of certain Ukrainian and Ukrainian-American artists who who are producing work today, especially, you know, in the last few years. But what did your paper actually become about? How did you finalize? You know, I could tell you my version of the story, but I want to hear yours. You know, how did you come to your topic? And please tell us what the topic is first.
Right. So the title is, you can probably read on the little paper that you have, but it's Memory Threads: Ukrainian Crafts Woven into the Tapestry of Contemporary American Art. Yeah, initially my little proposal was about art, Ukrainian art and trauma, because I was inspired from the little panel discussion that we had in Volta. But then I went to Borshch of Art website and looked at their beautiful database that they have with so many Ukrainian-American artists living and those who passed away. But it's a very, very good source to just like get an idea who is even Ukrainian-American artists, because I swear there's so many names that you had no idea that they have any sort of Ukrainian descent. But I went there and I started just looking through every single portfolio that I could, and then I realized that I should probably write about something that is also very dear to me, and that's ended up to be Ukrainian crafts. So my mom taught me how to cross stitch when I was probably 8 years old, and I've been making some łatankas for my friends before I was leaving Bard. So I decided to look whether there are any Ukrainian-American artists who also incorporate Ukrainian craft in their work and reimagine it. But thank you. Indian theater was actually an exhibition in the Hassel Museum. It's at Bard, and I worked there for 1.5 years. And that was also like a track of thoughts in my head.
It really inspired you.
Yes.
What about the show inspired you?
So most of the exhibits in that show were actually created by incorporating weaving, embroidery, and stitching. And
by contemporary artists.
Yes, by indigenous contemporary artists. And I know a few of them in person, so I just remember walking around those galleries and thinking about these crafts in these cultures and how those crafts and their representation now in contemporary American art is like a statement of resilience. And it's very similar to what Ukrainian-American and Ukrainian artists are doing when they incorporate craft into their artwork. So yeah, that was my thinking process, I guess. That's how I ended up writing about craft and selecting the Ukrainian-American artists that I chose.
Yeah, I mean, as your mentor, I think it was really exciting for me to hear you interested in craft. I mean, it's not necessarily directly in my wheelhouse. Of course, I've encountered craft and craft movements within and outside of American art over the course of my career. And I'm very conscious of the kind of loaded term that craft is, how it relates to material, how it relates to gender. And so, I mean, a lot of the discussions we had over the 3-4 months that we've been working together, meeting bi-weekly, on Zoom, occasionally in person, unpacking these ideas, exchanging research, exchanging articles, tips and tricks with, exhibitions that are on view or available online. And so it's, it has been equally for me a very, enlightening moment as well to work through these ideas with Olenka. And I don't know if we want to go to the next slide, you could sort of see a little bit of our, behind the scenes Zoom sessions that we've had together here with Anastasia at times. And then on the next slide, I really want to dig into your process. So I think it's very important that you came to the topic and that you were using the Discover database, which is hosted by and created by Borshch of Art and the many contributors who are actively growing that database. So if you do check it out online, we encourage you to check it out again because it is growing, if not day by day, week by week. And so you chose to work with living artists. So tell me a little bit about that. As someone who works with living artists, I know it can be tricky.
It wasn't that tricky, but when I was at BART, I was working a lot with archives, and I really didn't want to do it again. So I mean, it's very valid and it's very hard work, but I was also very tired of it. So
There's pros and cons to both.
Yes. So and also I don't think that I've met that many Ukrainian-American artists, so I was just curious to talk to them if they were open to share about their work and ask my very specific questions about how it's reimagined and how it's related to Ukrainian crafts and maybe their stories with Ukrainian crafts and how they learned to do what they're doing. So I chose 4 artists, and yeah, I had 3 studio visits and 1 Zoom call with one of the artists, but the artists were Ilona Sochynsky, Ola Rondiak, Katrina Majkut, and Wirhun.
Do you have another slide with them?
I think we do, yes.
Yes, perfect. So you can see a little bit more of their work.
And I conducted interviews with all of them, and then based on that, I wrote like little essays about their work, but also framed it with more general themes of tradition and identity. But also when I think I was, basically everything I know, it comes from wall text at exhibitions at this point, but I read at one of the wall texts that text and textile come from the same word, Latin word texere, which means weaving. So when I write, I think about it also as a craft. So you write and you weave.
That's beautiful.
So that's also sort of like a methodology that comes in play here. But yeah.
Well, and I think this again is a great exhibition of your background, your roots in Indigenous studies, the way, you know, even in our conversations together through this mentorship, just thinking about like what the questions were, how you approached each artist and pursued and requested these interviews. I think it all really was in the spirit of that decolonial mindset that you established at the start of this talk. So, I mean, I have a few more questions, but I think it might be time you share a little bit more from the paper in a slightly more formal manner, if you're comfortable, if you're, you know, these 4 incredible artists all have very unique practices, and I do think you have also some images for each.
Yes.
So, please.
Which one you want?
Please begin where you think.
I think I will read an abstract right now. Okay. And then I'll explain how each artist is connected to Ukrainian craft and how I weave the text.
Beautiful.
So the abstract is, my paper focuses on the intersections of traditional and contemporary art and the resulting dialogue between the two as evidenced in Ukrainian-American art. I highlight 4 artists that reimagine and engage Ukrainian crafts in their practice, from Ola Rondiak's Motonka sculptures and Wirhun's reimagined pisanki and actual mosaics to Ilona Sochynsky traditional color palette and Katrina Majkut's cross-stitched political messages. My paper highlights how Ukrainian crafts can be woven into the tapestry of contemporary art, thus rethinks the meaning of Ukrainian heritage and its presence in the global art context. And as I said, my 2 main themes were tradition and identity, and I can read a few quotes on those things. So, tradition is one of the definitions of culture often associated with the past and marginalized communities affected by colonialism. And here comes the quote from Native Studies Keywords, and this quote is important because it shows Western approach to the concept of tradition. And even though the quote is talking about Indigenous societies specifically, it can be applied to any people who suffered from colonialism and keep suffering from colonialism. The chapter on tradition in Native Studies Keywords states that tradition is often framed as a representation of the past that Indigenous people today have preserved and continue to honor through a set of practices. Within the colonialist discourse, however, Native traditions are supposed to remain unchanging in order for them to be authentic. In many cases, the mixing and adaptation of tradition has been necessary for survival." End of quote. Traditions also change when they are removed from their place of origin and planted elsewhere. The new environment influences the way and pace with which Traditions also change when they are removed from their place of origin and planted elsewhere. The new environment influences the way and pace with which traditions change and gradually diverge from the original source. However, the changes happen in tradition regardless of whether they are taken out of their original context or not. Change is not a bad thing. It means that tradition is alive. So the whole thing about tradition in this paper is that the main thing is that tradition changes and it's okay because it means that it's actually alive and the culture is alive. So it was very important to me to find these reimagined traditions and modernized traditions, and that's what I talked with every artist about.
Yeah, I mean, you have picked up on these threads in each of their practices where they take something that is traditionally Ukrainian and then bring it into the 21st century, into contemporary art. They reimagine it, reinvent it, they ascribe their own, whether it be a color palette or kind of thematic, onto that material or that subject matter. And you know, what I think you also do is bring them together and in conversation with one another. So I don't know if you want to dig into a few other, you know, examples from each, just to show the audience just a little bit more and bring in some of your other ideas from the paper. Or we could talk about surprises and some challenges from your research.
I think I will go over each artist and how their work is connected to Ukrainian crafts. So with Ilona Sochynsky was the color palette, which is inspired by Ukrainian embroidery, and you can see a few examples that are available on her website of these newer works from Cry Havoc, and then the next one is In State of War. And this work actually has a reference to Primachenko, which is in that eye, and I'm very grateful that Ilona shared that with me because that was a very interesting detail. With Katrina Majkut, she embroiders this cross stitch. It's interesting because whenever I ask any artist when they learn how to do whatever they're doing, whether it's Tsygankova's fall or embroidery with Katrina Majkut, it's always, I was 8 years old and I also was 8 years old, so I don't understand what's going on with that number or age, but okay. So Katrina Majkut, she addresses women's struggle. These two works are from her series In Control, and with this, she addresses women's struggles through so-called women's work, which is embroidery, and she also uses observational painting techniques. So she doesn't draw sketches of anything she's embroidering, only she would map out the words on whatever the bottle or the box, but other than that she embroiders just by sight. I think that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Like freehand.
Yes, freehand.
Yeah.
Ola Rondiak, I saw her in Motenkas at first, the Volta Art Fair.
Can you just describe what a motenka is in case anyone doesn't know what that is?
It's a Ukrainian rag doll, and there's like a specific way how you make it. And Ola Rondiak makes interpretations of them using just mixed media, and the one that is on the image, it's from a or like Hutul woven blankets, I assume. And also her art, or the way that it's framed, it's a contemporary art with historical coincidence because it's connected to the story of her grandma who was embroidering in Gulag, and then when she was freed from Gulag, she left and she took all the embroideries that she made there in secret, even though she knew that if she gets caught, she will be killed. She was still embroidering using fish bones and threads from her clothes to make these icons or other little things. And then they were in Ukraine, but then she just gave it to a stranger who transported them to the US, and then through Ukrainian newspaper they somehow found the family, and that's how Ola Rondiak's family now has those embroideries for her grandma, who she's never seen.
I mean, that for me also resonates with your original research interest of trauma. There's so many different threads, not, pun intended, I guess, so many different threads in this research that brings you back to these topics that are of great interest, and that trauma is indeed embedded in so much of this work.
Yeah, so, okay. In Wirhun, I had a studio visit and also went to gallery talk. And these images are from the gallery talk. So Paul works with the concept of pysynka, but also
which is describe.
Sorry. It's called Ukrainian Easter egg, which is made with batik technique, which you apply molten wax to an egg and then you dip it into liquid paint, and then you remove the wax with fire, just melt it over the fire, and then the wax protects the layer that you put it on, so whatever was covered with wax does not get colored when you dip it into the liquid paint. But Paul reimagines pysynki, but he still preserves this cultic and cultural significance of the egg as a symbol of the cosmos and the ancient symbols with meanings behind each on the eggs. But there's so many things that I can say about every single artist and everything they're doing, but you'll read it in the paper.
Absolutely. This is a great advertisement for the paper. My mic. Okay.
You can have mine, and then
so
we'll switch.
I'll just ask you a quick question. So could you, everyone wants to always hear this when they come to these kind of talks that are giving you a behind-the-scene look at the process. So could you share with us maybe some surprises from your research, some challenges, or let's call them opportunities, things you may have not expected, or things that you probably will never forget?
Well, things that I will never forget were probably just the interviews with the artists, and I'm so grateful for every each of them that they dedicated their time and shared their space with me. And I'm just grateful for their time and for the gifts that they gave me. And now, apparently, I will be a famous bandura player because Paul gave me his bandura, which I'm so grateful for, and a love for bread, which is very Ukrainian coded. And
okay, wait, explain that for a minute. So what is a bandura?
Okay,
I'm the Ukrainian translator here.
It's a Ukrainian string instrument, and my friend who plays bandura professionally is here now today, which is Ksenia. She will tell you more about bandura.
It's a very generous gift.
Yes,
very generous gift.
Because it's a music instrument, and I've been learning how to play bandura over the summer for a little bit, but I didn't have my own. I would have to borrow one, and I'm just grateful that I have my own bandura now. But yeah, it's a big string instrument, and it's like a harp, but the strings on it is flipped backwards, so that is this here. I can talk about it forever.
I mean, it's really wonderful, the relationships that you forged. I mean, thanks to Borshch of Art and the fellowship with these artists. I mean, these are lifelong relationships that you can continue as your research develops, and of course, as these artists' careers continue and they work on new projects and new exhibitions and new catalogs. I think it could be very reciprocally beneficial for you all to continue these relationships. And this is, clearly a very, very special relationship, a loaf of bread and a bandura. I've not heard of anything more Ukrainian than that. And so, anything else you'd want to share? Any behind the scenes looks? And if not, I was hoping you could tell us all a little bit more. If you know someone who is interested in applying for this fellowship, what advice would you give them?
I would say that everything is within your reach. You just have to reach for it. So I don't know whether the next fellow is in this room right now or no, but do apply or tell people to apply, because it's a wonderful opportunity not to just write a lot, which paper was supposed to be 15 pages long, it's 40. So that's probably the challenge that I faced, is forcing myself to stop, because it's the same as with the artwork. You have to find this stopping point, but you can't. But you have to force yourself, but you can't. I had to. So it's 40 pages long. But yeah, the more, because the more you research, the more research material you find, and it's just never ending. Also, probably perfectionism was my challenge, still is, but it's okay. And yeah, advice, don't be perfectionistic. That's the advice for the next fellow.
Well, I think, 40 pages, it could have been 400 pages.
That's also right.
But that is also for you to take on. I mean, just as much as the next fellow maybe is sitting in this room or watching this online, you too will continue to sort of carry this with you as you continue to develop as a scholar, as a curator, as a researcher. What's next for you? What do you hope to do next?
I have one more piece of advice. Always check your spam mailbox.
Oh,
because
yes.
I went to Paul Wirhun's gallery talk, knowing that I emailed him, but
Not even once. You emailed him.
No, I emailed once, but he emailed me 3 times, and I had no idea, and it felt so bad. I still feel bad. I'm sorry, but what I plan to do after the fellowship, I'm applying for a master's in curatorial studies. So we'll see how that goes. And
Good luck.
Thank you. And on April 5th, I am presenting this research paper at the Northeast Slavic, East European and Eurasian Conference at NYU. And that's the thank you. That's the opportunity that Borshch of Art Anastasia specifically introduced me to, so I'm very grateful because I don't think that I would ever find that. And yeah.
And that's part of the ACES network, which is the larger association for Eastern European and Slavic
That's
studies.
a different thing.
Oh, that is. Oh, okay. I thought
Yeah.
that was part of ACES.
No,
Okay.
I'm applying for that too. But
Okay.
We'll see how it goes.
Well, needless to say, it's wonderful to see this research on these different stages, regionally, hopefully at the larger ACES conference, which is a national conference, and of course, as you continue your hopefully touch wood studies, this will continue to play a role and influence your work. I do think like so many of the core methodologies and ideas that you touched upon in this fellowship will stay with Borshch of Art and stay with the Discover database, stay with our resources, and much like the relationship with the artists that you forged, I mean the relationship with Borshch of Art, is very much solidified and something that will hopefully be maintained and reciprocal for many, many years to come. So with that, I think we can open the floor to questions. Thank you, Olenka. Round of applause for our inaugural Borshch of Art.